and it goes up the food chain and gets magnified, biological magnification. I can't remember the exact term. If you want to know more, look up Roger Payne's TED Talk, Attending the Whale Song, which I'll link in the links section of the website and the podcast notes as well. So having said all that, this mercury contamination essentially renders dolphin and whale meat unfit for human consumption. The mercury contamination, the mercury content of dolphin and whale meat is well exceeding the levels of mercury contamination that the WHO deems toxic. So dolphin and whale meat, for starters, is not safe meat for humans to be consuming. That's the first thing. The second thing is that depending on the particular species of cetaceans, there are conservation issues with eating this sort of meat. So you have the toxic issues, the human health issues. And I'll also link some information about mercury poisoning in the links as well. So please check that out. I won't go into too much of it here in the podcast. Please look at the links. So the other problem is that these species have varying degrees of recovery from previous hunting and other commercial activities that have harmed them. The dolphin species that are hunted in Japan are not necessarily going extinct worldwide, but these activities of capture and slaughtering for meat, these are having a detrimental effect on local populations. For starters, they're having a dysgenic effect as the best and brightest and healthiest of pods are taken for captivity. That's for species like spottle-nose, Pacific white-sided, that tend typically not to be slaughtered. They're going to have serious dysgenic effects on their population. The other problem is that this just continuous slaughter and capture is not only going to have a dysgenic effect on populations that are left behind, but it is going to cause extinction in the local area, causing devastating effects on local ecosystems. So it is a conservation issue. In regards to eating cattle, sheep, pigs, these sorts of animals, what a lot of people forget, and what wasn't actually mentioned on the website, is that these animals were actually domesticated millennia ago. They were domesticated and bred for the purpose of eating, for the purpose of milking for dairy, for the purpose of being shorn for wool, for these sorts of purposes. These animals were deliberately domesticated, and their breeding has resulted in them being domesticated for these purposes. A lot of these animals would probably not survive in the wild without that constant human care. That's a very different story to slaughtering a sentient being that is wild. Now, on the issue of sentience, of course, there are probably a lot of Christian conservatives and other types that are listening to this podcast that would probably squeal at me for saying that dolphins are sentient. But unfortunately for them, and this is one of the things that actually turned me pagan, is that dolphins and whales actually are sentient. Their brains are larger in a lot of cases. In the cases of certain species like orcas, sperm whales, and other such cetaceans, their brains are larger than ours. Pretty much a lot of these species have more complex, neurologically complex brains than ours. They have in abundance a particular brain cell called a spindle neuron, which I discussed in the first podcast, meaning that these brain cells control for complex emotions and high communication, i.e. speech. Species such as bottlenose dolphins, orcas, and sperm whales actually have more spindle neurons in their brains than we do, meaning they are actually more capable of higher communication and complex emotions than we do. And these are the sorts of qualities that lead to and control for sentience, i.e. self-awareness. These beings are self-aware, they are sentient just as we are, and for me personally, this is why I have a problem with eating them, because I recognise, and I love animals, don't get me wrong, but I recognise that not all animals are sentient, but these guys are, and for me that is why it's wrong to eat them. While a lot of domesticated animals are aware of their surroundings and these sorts of things, I wouldn't necessarily say they are sentient in the way that cetaceans, elephants, and the great apes are. So, therefore, we have to recognise that there is a difference, for me, on a philosophical level, between eating a sentient being that is proven scientifically to be sentient, their brain structures are larger and more complex than ours, and eating an animal that has been bred over millennia to be eaten or to be used for food and other sustenance. So that for me is the philosophical issue. That's the breakdown of it. Having said all that, there is every reason we should be kind to domesticated animals that we breed for meat and dairy. We should be kind to them. We should be allowing them to express their natural behaviours as much as possible while they are living. They should be allowed to be pastured, of course, weather permitting. They should not be factory farmed. That is absolutely cruel. And during slaughter, every effort should be made as much as possible to treat them as humanely during the pre-slaughter as possible, and every effort should be made to ensure that they don't see others being slaughtered. And again, I reference people like Temple Grandin regarding these issues, and I will certainly I'll do my best, I should say, to link some of her work in the links as well. Okay, so I hope that we have that philosophical issue of domesticated animals versus eating dolphins cleared up, and of course with domesticated animals, eating organic I would always advise. If you're going to eat meat, eat organic, pastured meat. It's better for you because there's no toxins in the meat, but it's also better for the animals because organic equals animal welfare. Organic farmers, by virtue of being organic, have to pay attention to animal welfare standards, because if you don't, it's not organic. It's as simple as that. Okay, so now we've cleared that up, I wanted to talk about the issue of nationalism regarding these Taiji dolphin drive hunts. As I mentioned in the first part of the podcast, the Japanese people are a very nationalistic, ethnocentric people, and I wish Europeans were the same in a lot of ways, because I certainly am. The Japanese people are very, very, shall we say, bound to each other. They are, like I said, ethnocentric, nationalistic. They see each other as part of an extended family, which is how I see Europeans. And this is actually, I think, a good thing. And I support the sentiment in Europeans. I think we Europeans actually need to learn this particular lesson from the Japanese people. You know, we need to learn to be ethnocentric, essentially. It's not a bad thing to basically want a strong border and to want to fight for the interests of your own people and your own group. And it's not a bad thing to actually advocate for your own people to have a homeland. And I want to be very clear that I don't advocate for white ethno-states in places like New Zealand where I happen to live. I don't advocate for them in New Zealand, America, Australia, Canada, these sorts of places. I advocate for white ethno-states in Europe because Europe is the home of white people. What I advocate for here is that we as white people should be able to freely and openly organise to advocate in the best of our own interests as a collective, just as other racial groups do in our country's example, Māori in New Zealand. But I digress. The reason I bring this up is because I think this is really important for us nationalists. First of all, there's a Japanese nationalistic element to this issue that I feel needs to be addressed. Secondly, there's a white nationalist element to this issue that needs to be addressed. So, regarding the Japanese nationalists' point of view, first of all, I'm not Japanese, so it's not up to me to advocate for the best interests of the Japanese people. I can be an ally of them, but I can't advocate for them. That's their job. Their job is to protect their homeland, protect their environment, conserve their environment, and ensure a secure future for their people. That's their job. Now, the problem I see with some of the coverage of the Taiji dolphin drive hunts from organisations which, like Dolphin Project, who I respect, but I have to call them out on this one, is that I see a lot of people getting Japanese nationalism mixed up. They don't really understand what nationalism is. So I wanted to kind of break down what nationalism actually is. Nationalism to me is not my country and my people right or wrong. That is not nationalism. That's just being an idiot, okay? I'm going to call it bluntly. It's being an idiot. A true nationalist wants what's best for his people. He wants a secure future for his people. He wants a homeland for his people with secure borders, and he wants to determine and vet who does and does not come into his borders. And a true nationalist is a good earth steward to his homeland. He takes care of the environment in his homeland. and he makes sure that that environment is kept as clean and pristine as possible, because he recognizes that without a clean environment, there's no healthy future for his people. And on a global scale, there's no healthy future for his people without a healthy, intact biosphere called Earth. That is what a true nationalist is. A true nationalist will also not shy away from giving tough love to his people when needed. A true nationalist will call his people out if they're doing something wrong. This is healthy nationalism. A nationalist does not excuse bad behaviour from his people. I recently had to deal with this because, and I'll link the story in the description below as well, in the podcast as well, about the fact that I called it out about some white people who were behaving extremely disgustingly towards a dolphin, and as a white person I was absolutely appalled that fellow white people could do that sort of thing, because as you know, I believe that we can be better. So what does explaining what a nationalist is have to do with the Taiji dolphin drive hunts? Well, first of all, from a Japanese point of view, natural Japanese nationalism, healthy Japanese ethnocentrism, is being exploited by what I believe to be an alien force. I don't mean alien from outer space, I mean alien from out of Japan. An alien force that is not native to Japan, that has nothing to do with Japanese culture. It's also and with the help of local Japanese collaborators who are blinded by dollar signs and who are not truly ethnocentric, although in order to gain the support of the Japanese public, they will give the impression that they are truly ethnocentric nationalist Japanese people. And this is exactly what's going on with Taiji. The reality is that most Japanese people do not know what's being done in their name. And I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, and I likened it to the American military-industrial complex and how a lot of Americans are unaware of what's actually being done in their name. In the case of America, it's war and what's being done to peoples around the world. In the case of Japan, it's what's being done to their environment. And this is the thing, that a true nationalist would not let this happen to their environment. These people like Mr. Abe, who is the current Japanese Prime Minister in 2019, are not true Japanese nationalists. That might come as a shock to a lot of people. But the reality is that these people who claim to be nationalists actually exploit Japanese ethnocentrism in order to continue to allow for the international dolphin captivity industry, or international dolphin trafficking, let's just call it for what it is, to essentially operate in Japan. And of course, this is a field day. Because from the captivity industry's point of view, it's great. Because if you're operating, if you are wanting to industrialize live dolphin capture, there are a few things you want. You want a country that is very ethnocentric and therefore more likely to listen to and obey authority. You want a country that's more likely to implement a tyrannical government. So that pretty much rules a lot of the West out. But you want a country that has a high IQ at the same time. Because if you have a country that has a high IQ, then it means that the local population can maintain the infrastructure necessary to maintain an industrial scale live dolphin capture. That's the first thing. The second thing is that Japan was a very perfect place to set up shop, because you have the Kuroshio current coming down the coast of Japan between September and March, bringing all the dolphins down. So you have the natural resource. You have the tyrannical government in people like Abe and other corrupt government officials that are essentially being paid off by the international dolphin trafficking industry. And you also have a high IQ population that is able to maintain an industrial scale live dolphin hunt, live dolphin capture, and maintain the infrastructure to ensure industrial scale international dolphin trafficking. So these are really important. The meat is just a byproduct, and this is the thing that gets lost in the debates. When people start talking about cows and sheep and pigs, they're forgetting that the meat, the slaughter of dolphins for meat, is just a byproduct of this industry. And so Japanese nationalism is essentially being twisted and exploited to favour these people. And the Japanese people have been successfully programmed into destroying their environment, or at least believing it's okay. Because whenever these issues are reported in Japan in the Japanese media, then they're reported that essentially the they're spun into this idea that there's a conspiracy